Welcome to the Leadership Window podcast with Dr. Patrick Jinks. Each week, through a social sector lens, Patrick interviews leaders and experts and puts us in touch with trends and tips for leading effectively. Patrick is a board-certified executive coach, a member of the Forbes Coaches Council, a best-selling author, award-winning photographer, and a professional speaker. And now, here's Dr. Patrick Jinks.
Hello, everyone. It's episode 156 of the Leadership Window. Thanks for coming along. The year is more than half over now. 2026 is leaving us quickly. How's it going for you? What's left? What are you going to do in the second half to make the second half better than the first half? I don't know. I just thought of that just now. And as I asked myself that question, it's a pretty challenging question. I need to pause with that one. Thanks for joining us. We have a great conversation today. This one's going to be pretty unscripted. I came in contact with our guest, Jeanine Becker, not too long ago, and we had a brief offline conversation about the work that she is doing to help organizational founders, funders, really anyone in the space of creating social impact, be it corporate social enterprise, or be it a conventional, more traditional nonprofit, be it a philanthropic foundation. And she is helping organizations think more deeply. She works with what she calls purpose-led leaders, and we're going to talk about that purpose piece at some point as well, because Jeanine has got a number of different tracks in her work that she's delivering to the world and offering in value, and it's just all so fascinating. But she does work particularly in the nonprofit and philanthropic space, helping them to think more strategically, more systemically. We're going to talk about that word probably a lot today, rather than transactionally. And so I'm really interested in this conversation. Jeanine, I'll say it up front, then I'll say it in the end. The website to go to, and the link is on our podcast page, but it's onpurposetogether.com. That is Jeanine's organization, onpurposetogether.com. And we'll talk about the various resources and things that she's doing. She's coming to us from Portland, Oregon. She's out on the West Coast. And
that's right.
Jeanine, thank you, first of all, for the outreach and the connection and for carving out time to have a fun conversation with us today.
Yeah, I'm so grateful to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me on and having me here today.
Well, what did I miss in my intro? What's the real important thing that people need to know that I didn't cover in the traditional sort of bio that I gave?
I would say, I think it's the mix of I've learned and studied the pieces of the work and what we're going to talk about academically. And then you'll also hear stories of how I've come to them for my own personal growth alongside my clients over the last 15 years. So you'll hear some more of the personal journey there too.
Man, I love that you said that, because I experienced that too. In studying organizational leadership in academia is one thing. You learn theory and case studies and all these things, but there's no case study or theory that can inform and educate the way just getting in and experiencing something. And not everything can be covered by an academic framework. So I appreciate that you said that. I can relate.
Yeah, I think that's where, I taught negotiation and collaboration at Stanford for a decade.
Mm-hmm.
So I knew the theory. I had trained hundreds of students in the process of negotiation and what it takes to collaborate, and the skills. But then I was a solo parent and had to actually ask for help and lean on support and collaborate, not because it was nice or because I had so much to offer, but because I also had needs. And that taught me different skills that I didn't actually ever bring to the classroom that I now bring to my clients. The vulnerability and the edge and the gift of that alongside kind of years of study and theory and practice, right? So the pairing of the two gives me a richer perspective from which to hold space.
Now I'm interested in what you taught at Stanford. You said negotiation and collaboration. Who are these students? Negotiation in what? And how do those two go together? Can you give me just a little sense of what's that class about?
Yeah, I mean, it was a full-term class. I frame it as around collaboration. The work that I did as an attorney previously was around deals. It was about bringing different organizations together to make agreements. And so it was taught in the law school. It was some of the basics of the theory and your kind of classic bargaining for advantage text and win-win negotiation. And how do you prepare? How do you open? How do you frame? How do you package options, right? Like that. But to me, it was more life skills in some ways of what do you do when you have leverage? How do you relate to risk? I think there was something powerful for students seeing, 15 other adults like them, young adults, have the same set of facts. And do you always feel like you have more power or less? What do you do when the stakes are high? And do you know how you relate to difference? So I often still bring into my coaching work, the kind of the different ways of engaging with difference. Do you compete? Do you compromise? Do you accommodate? Or do you collaborate? And so I talk about it as negotiation and collaboration because most of what those students are going to do going forward is not formal settlement agreements that are just strictly negotiate zero-sum game. Most of what we're doing in life is crafting ways to understand other people's perspectives and needs and see how we can relate with those in a way that ours also get met and collaborate well.
I just find it interesting that those two are together. When I think negotiation, not being formally trained in it at all, we think about negotiation as win, lose, or compromise. But compromise isn't the word you've used here. You've used collaborate. And I think that's really interesting. There's negotiating to win, right? Yeah. I want to come out on top of this deal and leverage my power and my influence and all of that. But you're talking about negotiating to collaborate, like collaboration being a part of the negotiating objective.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right. It's different. If I'm going to just buy a car, there's one deal point, there's one price point. It's good or bad, wherever it's at. Right. But longer term, even organizational deals or partnerships or strategic alliances a nonprofit leader might be making, or a relationship with a funder. It isn't just about the amount of money. You're building a relationship, you're scaling it over time. There's more factors than just one that kind of is coming in high or low.
So how has that work led you into what you're doing now? And by the way, what are you doing now? Like what are you doing in the world that brings you meaning and brings others value?
I appreciate the framing that way. I think what I'm doing now is partnering with purpose-led leaders to really think about how they grow their impact in a way that leverages both their internal team and the relationships there, as well as kind of a broader ecosystem or a broader network. I'm helping leaders look at not just putting their organization at the center of the work they're doing, but think about the bigger systems they want to shift, the bigger impact they want to have, and how is their organization and how are they personally contributing to that, and who else is needed at the table. So to me, I talk about my work as that place where personal growth meets strategy. Like, yes, you want to have a bigger impact. And who do you need to be as a leader to be the catalyst, to be cultivating the conditions for that to be possible?
Yeah. You also got my attention, and I don't remember where I found it, but your work and your study in vertical development. And that's been a field that we've focused on a lot, the work of Bill Torbert and action inquiry, and the vertical development stages being our sort of capacity, not our competencies.
Yes.
And that's a great way to connect that, is connecting organizational strategy to the stage we are in our worldview and our vertical development, how we bring personal development into leading strategy work. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, right. I studied with cultivating leadership in some of Jennifer Garvey Berger's work. So I was a student there for 2 years and kind of went deep in that direction. But for me, I think when I see with my clients right now, so many, if we're focusing on purpose, on making a difference, there's a level of complexity right now. There's multiple perspectives. There's your organization, whatever it is, however big it is, cannot solve this by itself. So that shift in personal and kind of development to be able to hold multiple perspectives, to be able to see the value of your contribution and to know that it's partial. I think to do that kind of systems level work it's an invitation for growth. It's hard to do without actually shifting the meaning that you make about your contribution and the role that you play.
One of the most, and I don't know when it happened, I guess it's still happening, maybe more and more. I tend to see my life as somewhere a point where it clicked for me to say, I don't know nearly what I thought I knew. And then the place where you go, that's actually really exciting. Like it's liberating to say that, to say the words, I don't know. And part of the vertical development, right, is moving from certainty to inquiry. And certainly say, why does this work the way this works? In our coaching world, you'll appreciate this. In our coaching world, we'll often hear I'll often have a coachee present to me a very specific leadership challenge, which is usually a kind of a management, very technical sort of challenge. How do I get Susie to do her reports on time? Right? Something that simple.
Yep.
And they want the coach to help them solve that problem. And when I learned to ask questions like, tell me your leadership style. How do you lead Susie and the others? How do they respond to your leadership? What kind of system have you created that allows someone to not turn in their reports on time? Maybe even rewards it. What are the systemic things that are happening that if we fix those, Susie's not the issue? It's a path problem, maybe. It's a systems problem. When I learned to ask more questions like that, my coaching just really opened up for people.
I can feel that. I mean, I can feel the difference between, I'm not stepping in to solve your problem. My hope is that I elevate the question you're asking, right?
Yeah.
It's to play right there.
Yeah.
With that tension. And so I feel like I see that. I feel like I see this edge often with clients who've moved from a subject matter expert to a leadership position where they now are holding areas they don't have expertise in. And kind of the imposter syndrome or the terror of like, but I don't have the answers. I'm like, perfect.
Yeah.
That's not your job. So now we get to say, all right, well, what is your job? If it isn't to have all the answers, what is the job to lead from this seat? And I think to me, that's one of the gifts from coaching is that they get to experience, my clients get to experience that from me. And I've had clients say like, like you regularly ask me questions where I'm like, I should have asked that. I should have asked myself that.
Yeah.
But now I turn and I behave that way, right? They invite their team into the kind of inquiry they receive in coaching, and that's part of the gift.
Mm-hmm. Oh man. All right. This is getting really rich. This is the kind of stuff. Well, let me ask you this. How do you, a big question here that I'm going to ask you to answer simply for us. How do you help a leader think more systemically? Like, where do you start when you're leading an organization? Let's say it's a community-based nonprofit. I work with a lot of those. And man, their challenge is it's pretty simple, right? Man, we're trying to address homelessness. And man, we got funding challenges, and we see our world from our point of view. We see the need out there. We have these services. We have these ideas. We get grants for them. We do these things. How do you get leaders like that to see and think because it's a mindset shift. It's a habit change to think, what's the system, both the outside system that's bigger than us and the smaller systems that are a part of us. Where's your starting point for helping leaders to think differently that way?
Yeah, I'm thinking of a particular client who was actually at a foundation, who came in. They're primarily focused on working with immigrants and refugees. And she came in just with a sense of urgency. Like, how do I move $1 million fast? Just like, and that was the question she presented. Like, our grantees are in trouble. So things feel very uncertain and unstable and unsafe, right? That was the question. And I will say what I noticed with her was it both felt urgent and heartbreaking. Both. She had the question, and I feel like a lot of people like you're talking about, of like, right, how do I help with homelessness right now in my community? It's urgent. And there's also a sense of it's not enough. So I feel like my first...
Yeah, especially in the field. So you named, refugees, immigration, things those are homelessness. We could go into domestic violence. There are some heavy, complicated systems and issues out there. And it's really overwhelming for a passionate social sector leader to dive into that world, and you knowing you're not going to save them all. You're not going to fix it all. You're going to have losses.
Yeah.
But you gotta stay in it. There's got to be just a ton of your work around, again, the person and the self-care and how do I keep that going?
There is, but I think in this moment, that the opening door for me is shifting it from like, how do I do this thing fast to bigger picture. I asked, like, right, I said, you seem like that's not enough. That's heartbreakingly small. So tell me, what's actually needed here? Like, what do you really want? What do you really see as possible? What do you really see as needed? Because it shifted from what can my organization do, what I can do today, to like bigger picture, what's needed. You have any of those leaders at any of those organizations touching any of those systems you just named, have a bigger sense of the ecosystem than they're focused on in that quarter, in that month, in that program cycle, in that granting cycle, right? They have a bigger, so she said, okay, like, here's what's needed. Here's what I see is actually needed. It's like, great. How much resources available for that you have? And kind of who else needs to be at that table?
What I love about that framing, our listeners will relate to, because they've heard us talk about this a lot. And we've had people like Hildy Gottlieb on to talk about changing the questions and thinking creatively. And she is the one who got me onto the concept of appreciative inquiry.
Yes.
And the idea, you didn't ask her, well, what's the biggest problem you're facing? You asked her what's needed and what would it take to get there? And where can we find those resources and those possibilities? It's a whole different framing than, what are the big barriers that you've got to overcome? The big brick walls that have got you stuck? That conversation doesn't move us forward.
No, I think especially when you're trying to shift out of this urgent Band-Aid, right, one cycle mode into a bigger frame, is to help someone just see where they fit in it. So if I can see the bigger need, I can see the wider ecosystem. And then my other question is, great, what's your unique contribution to that mix? What does your organization do that others can't? Who are you touching? Who are you coordinated with? Who are you in relationship with? It doesn't have to be that you have the most money or the most people, but what's your unique piece of that puzzle? And that, rather than feeling like, right, you said you can't save them all, you can't do it all. That's true. But what is uniquely your role?
Yes.
And I think that's a piece of the conversation.
Uniquely your role is a really big one for our work, Jeanine, because it points to mission.
Yes.
So your organizational mission is not the why. It's not the world needs saving. The mission is The world needs saving, and we can't do it alone. There's an ecosystem. There's a lot of people working on the problem for different angles. Our role, our impact is here. This is what we can do. And that's charge. That's mission. And so I appreciate that. I'd like to share something with you because I'd like our listeners to. I don't know that I've ever shared this. I was working with a local Habitat for Humanity affiliate here in South Carolina. And I noticed as we were working, it was strategic planning engagement, and the team kept using the word systems change. We want to be about systems change. And I paused and I asked, what do you mean by that? And I paused because I had realized how much I was hearing that term from nonprofits. We're about systems change. And yet when you ask them what that is, many of them, if not most of them, had a really hard time defining what they mean by that. It's in some ways it's a buzzword. It's trendy, and it's, the sectors it sounds like intuitively systems change. That sounds right, but so let's be about that. I kind of get it. But when you ask them to define it for their work, what it meant. And so we had this impromptu systems change theory session. Yeah. And what came out of that, and I won't go through all of it, I'll give you a few examples. Most people, if you think about Habitat for Humanity, they build houses, one house at a time. People who understand them a little bit better know that they build houses for people who they're trying to create home ownership for a family that would not be able to access it otherwise. The family has sweat equity into the work, so they help build the house, and funders and financiers and things help to make it all possible. But they're building one house at a time, and in many communities where Habitat resides, one house at a time is great, but funders are starting to go, yeah, but is that changing the game? You built 6 houses this year. That's great. It's wonderful. But have you looked at the big issue here? So this is why Habitat was saying we really want to get at systems change. So we asked them to define it, and they defined systems change. Love your take on this, by the way, Jeanine, good, bad, or otherwise. They defined, and again, I'm not the systems expert you are. I just know that words mean things, and they needed to define it. So they defined it as systems change is influencing fundamental improvement of embedded community structure. Systems change results in greater and easier access to affordable housing for all families. So they started with defining it. Yeah. That's very different than we build houses, right? And then we asked them, okay, so over the next 3 years, what do you do to change systems? And they started with some aspirational statements. We want to shape public perception of affordable housing as a driver of community health. We want to make affordable housing a public funding priority with a dedicated funding stream. Now they're talking affordable housing. They're talking home ownership. They're not talking about, we want to help every one house. Right. One family in need. So you get the idea. They built a whole structure for it, and what their efforts, because then we asked, okay, that's great. That's all concept. What's the work? And they ended up defining what the things were that they could do to impact systems. So I don't know. I'd love your reaction to that. I know it's not perfect, but it made them pause in a moment and go, wow, these aren't the conversations. These aren't the questions we've been asking. Right.
I think it's that moment of picking our head up from the individual work to say what's the upstream work that's needed here. Mm-hmm. What is the bigger picture? How is our work contributing to a broader ecosystem? And it sounds like that opportunity to define it was the highest leverage point is that paradigm shift. Like, I think I've studied with the Academy for Systems Change and some of Danilo Meadows' work there. And at that kind of the highest leverage point for a system is that perception, is that paradigm. And so it went from one house at a time to we are contributing to a structure for affordable housing for all. I think some paraphrase of what you just said.
Yeah.
Right. And a totally different strategy emerged from that paradigm shift.
Yeah.
And I think that's what I see with with the client I was talking about before. It went from how do I move $1 million fast to here's the need. Here's how my organization is contributing. The one thing I want to add to what you had said about it is it's the organizational mission, but it was also her own personal resource. So
Yeah.
what she noted, as we talked about, was like, oh, I personally have relationships across this ecosystem. I'm somebody who could bring people together, bring them to the table. Or if we run our grant cycle in this way and I talk about it with these people, I can bring other resources to bear. And so it went from a $1 million quick program to $4.5 million from her organization and multiple others, funding 80 additional organizations, because the shift went from how do I do this quickly to band-aid my existing grantees to what's needed, what's my unique contribution, my organization, but also me personally as a leader. It allowed her to say, okay, here's what the grant team can do, but also the program team and the advocacy team. Here's how we're going to partner with the other parts of our internal organization. And here are the other organizations, the people that I can call, that I can move with me. But it shifted to a broader view of the ecosystem. And I think for a lot of nonprofit leaders, a lot of foundation leaders, they think about the organizational mission and where the organization fits. And I just want to name the part about what are your resources? What are your relationships? Who can you call in and say, all right, here's where we're going. Here's what I see as my contribution. And here's my invitation. Here's how I see you playing a role in this and inviting them in more intentionally.
Let me ask you this, and I don't know the number, so I'm curious as to your experience on it. Do you see more nonprofits, the grantees, wishing that funders would think and fund more systemically, or do you see more funders wishing that nonprofits would function more systemically?
I don't know that I have an answer on which on balance. I think I'm right now working with some of both.
Yeah.
So I will see it. I'm working with some nonprofits in the focus on gender equity and technology to support organizations focused on women and girls. And one group has now, they've just did a landscape analysis of 250 organizations globally in the space and looking at this desire. There's a strong desire of nonprofits are seeing less. Well, they're seeing less resource coming. There's more resource constraint, and there's more of a sense of we have to do it differently, that we've been isolated and separate and contributing and all sort of making a play for a very small and shrinking pool of funds. So I think on the nonprofit side, there's a sense of how do we do this differently? And I think on the funder side, there's also a sense of, right, we've been, the needs are growing, the complexity is there. Federal government in some ways has pulled resources out, and there's in different areas, whether that's healthcare or education, there's sort of a sense of, all right, how are we going to step in and make a difference bigger than what we've done in the past? And so I think on both sides, you're seeing this moment of maybe it's a good, I'm hoping for a little bit more of a tipping point, or at least a moment where there's the inquiry of what we've been doing isn't enough. So now what?
Yeah, that's good. I remember when I was in leading an organization, and we were looking for some grant funds to convene and facilitate around early childhood in our community, particularly kindergarten readiness. And we went to a large foundation, a regional foundation, And I remember this was, early in my org leadership experience. And I remember going and talking to the funder. We had a good relationship with them. They were local. So relationship was as important as content. And I sat down and I said, hey, just early conversation, but what would be the feasibility? Would there be interest from the foundation to provide, say, $1 million over the next 5 years to help us plan and start doing some things in early childhood to move this needle? He said, very little interest in that. I said, really? He goes, yeah. What we might be interested in is $5 million over 2 or 3 years to build a real structure for long-term change. And that was a big learning moment for me, and a great gift from the foundation director at the time, who was just a gift to this small rural Southern Virginia town. But what a statement.
But I think that is the moment of, right, stop looking small and siloed and take a bigger picture. So I think part of the work that I've been doing with this group called Connected Power around gender equity of women and girls is actually meeting and interviewing many funders to see what their perspective is and what would have them say yes and what would have them interested. And what we're hearing is around collaboration. More organizations coming together is one of the things that would be attractive, bigger bets. But also a sense of, all right, we want to see the big systems change, but we also need to know that there's experiments, that there's work happening now, that there's, it's not just the $100 million big grant, big systems change. It's how is building towards that inspiring smaller shifts along the way.
Yep. I'm also seeing a growing number, actually, I know a number of them right now, of consultants in the nonprofit consulting space. And I'm a leadership coach. That's where my world mostly lives. But in the nonprofit consulting space, I'm seeing more consultants move toward community consulting. Bringing systems together to talk and to try to create collaboration. Things like, anything we've talked about, housing and homelessness, but I've seen a lot of it happen in the space of early childhood, transportation in a community, right? So it's not how does one nonprofit fix the transportation issue? It's how does the community talk about it, know it, dream together, act together, pool resources together, and say we're fit. So I'm seeing more of that, and I'm saying that to ask you: do you spend any time in that space where you find yourself communicating, or consulting rather, with full communities and cohorts and collaboratives?
I do. I mean, so my coaching and some of my organizational consulting work is on purpose together, but I also work in collaboration with a network called Weaving Futures. And through that group, we focus on impact networks. It's exactly what you're speaking about bringing cross-sector groups together to define, spark, and sustain the systems change that they're looking for, whether that's related to healthcare or education, right, in various areas. But I think that's an area where we both do training for leaders doing that work, and also do the consulting, run convenings, and provide ongoing advising for the groups that are coming together, where no one organization is owning and driving the change, but it is a collaborative effort.
Yeah. The big move over the last 20 years is the collective impact.
Yes.
And, the framework that came out of Stanford, as a matter of fact. And what I find with that is there have been some effective collective impact initiatives and work, but it kind of also turned into one of those terms that people use a little too loosely. Oh, we're doing a collective impact thing, not necessarily using the framework that is very, very carefully structured systemically.
Yeah.
You know,
I mean,
the mutually enforcing activities and the shared metrics and agreed upon goals and resourcing, and yes, having a backbone organization, but you know, how do you build the work groups and a real collaboration that is cross sector, cross organizational, even across geographies in some case. And so there is a, I'm saying all this to say there's a discipline of learning. You opened up talking about, you know, there's academic frameworks and then there's living it.
right.
I find a lot of leaders relying a little too heavily on the living it without the learning. Like there are some structures and there are concepts of systemic thinking and design and collective impact and mutual accountability and things. And a lot of it is around the discipline to pause and learn those things well.
Yeah, I mean, I think back to even when I was teaching negotiation, right? I had some students in my class that had just graduated college, had no work experiences, so they could absorb the theory, but they didn't have as much to of their own life experience to draw on. And then I've taught people who've been negotiating for 30 years. And I think there's a moment where you can take your practice, you can take what you've been doing and you can put it through the filter of some of these frameworks and actually understand why things, maybe
yes.
a deeper understanding of why things are working or why they're not, what to lean on, what you actually discovered organically, and where might be some blind spots. And so that's where I love, you know, part of my work in the past was running a cohort for foundation CEOs for 6 months. We brought in some of these frameworks and we talked about collaboration. We talked about decision making and shared decision making and how to be decisive and inclusive. So we had these conversations, but you add a framework on top of so much experience and skill. And finally, it can be like jet fuel. So it isn't about pause, stop what you're doing, go get the degree. It's about how do you deepen the learning. And you mentioned collective impact. I think that's an area, you know, what I'm talking about with networks is similar, but it's not exactly the same in the sense that you don't necessarily need to have all shared metrics and shared outcomes to drive a collective change. But they're different frameworks, and they're important for different reasons. And so I think there's a bit of, you know, what is it you're trying to do, with whom, to what end, and then to know enough or to bring in the guidance to say, all right, what are the frameworks that would serve us, and how do we choose best given where we're intending to go?
Yeah, I think you know, you're right on the whole shared metrics thing. There's a piece of the work that's shared, right?
Mm-hmm.
In a collective impact, everyone still has their own individual missions, their own brand identities, their own, you know, their own need to operate in their world, but there's a portion of it collectively that is shared. You've talked about shared ownership. What does that look like on the ground in an organization in organizations that have been historically either founder-led, siloed, the grant by grant piece? What does shared ownership actually look like? And maybe it's the metrics, but the ownership of it.
Yeah. I mean, I'm curious. Maybe it's my background as an attorney. Like, I get curious about what you mean by ownership. What does that mean, and for whom? So, is it about shared decision making within an organization? It's about shared kind of the shared intention or coming together to set the outcomes that are wanted in a larger collaboration. I think often when I see that an organization that's wanting that, especially for trust-based organizations, people that operate in that way, that are used to having a very participatory process, whether it's a foundation that's being more participatory and trust-based with its grantees, or grantees that are, you know, nonprofits that are active in a community in a participatory way. And then there's questions about, it's harder to have a kind of a command control leadership structure while you're doing that kind of work. And so how can you, as a leader, live the values internally that match the external work you're doing in the world? And how can you both be decisive in your leadership and set a clear strategy and bring people on board while allowing for enough autonomy and enough participation for people to feel like there's a resonance between the values that you're actively fostering in the broader work and how you live internally.
That was a lot right there. And it is a good question. What's shared ownership? We could do a whole episode just unpacking that. We're celebrating the 250th birthday of the United States of America, which was formed as kind of an experiment in some shared ownership, right?
Yeah.
How does that look different than other forms of government, forms of society? And, where have we done well at sharing that ownership, and where are we not doing well? Right now it's really tough to find that spot. But it's everything from a country to a community to an organization, the leaders inside one organization to share ownership.
Yeah.
A staff team, a staff leadership team, how are they sharing ownership of the mission of the organization? So that's what I mean. It can be really anything from something small to something big, but where it's not just, hey, I only own what's on my job description and it's transactional, as you say. I own my piece. Here's the delivery of it. Versus we all own this collectively.
I hear what you're speaking to more. I mean, I feel like I had a client who, came into the work, wanted support for his team because everybody was, if there was a problem, it was more looking at whose it was and pointing a finger over there rather than everybody stepping in and saying, how do we contribute to fixing this? And so ownership from the perspective of I'm a part of, I see myself responsible for the larger success of this mission and not just my piece of the puzzle. And I think that was a lot of interesting work to kind of build that sense of trust and collaboration and engagement and a shift of what is mine to do. I hear that. I think that's good work. I'm curious where you see that. What does it mean to you with the sense of shared ownership? Where do you see that?
Well, again, I think it's multiple parties sharing at least a piece of we've used the word accountability a lot in our work, and I've using Peter Block's definition of accountability as the ability to account. And rather than it being this consequence of not doing your work, right? You'll be held accountable. It's an ability. It's the ability to account. And so to me, shared ownership is mutual accountability. How are we collectively increasing our ability to account for what we're trying to achieve, to account for our collective commitments and our individual ones that contribute to the shared win? So I don't know. I don't know that I can define it any better than that right now.
No, I mean, I appreciate that. I feel like to me, sometimes the way that looks in a leadership meeting is the difference between everyone reporting out about where they stand related to their objectives, their stoplight chart of red, yellow, green, versus that document is a pre-read. And what the meeting is for is the dialogue around where you stuck. So celebration, right? What is it to be celebrating?
Where are we?
We haven't celebrated yet.
Stuck?
Yeah. And then it's also, right, what are the questions or the challenges that are beyond your area that need to be wrestled with together? And so I have one client where, some of our work right now is shifting the leadership meetings from report out conversations where accountability looks like being seen as I did it or I didn't do it, to accountability and shared ownership, meaning I'm showing up to celebrate wins and to work through challenges together collectively so that we have the outcome, because we're showing up with the awareness that it isn't so siloed. The solutions that are needed, the challenges that are present can't be solved by any of those one leaders. And so just shifting the leadership meetings from readouts to dialogue has been the place that's pivoted some of that shared ownership.
Taylor and Chait and one other author, I can't remember the names of them, but the governance as leadership or leadership as governance. I forget what the order was, but that talks about board meetings and board meetings being report outs and being, that fiduciary becomes perfunctory. And where's the generative conversation and dialogue? Where's the strategic conversation?
Yes.
And dialogue? I did some research for a book I wrote on strategic planning almost 10 years ago now, and served at 100 nonprofits across the country. And we asked them how often their boards meet, and the average was 6 times a year. And then we asked them how long were their board meetings, and the average was an hour. Oh. And so we started with the math of, okay, so on average then the nonprofit board is meeting 6 hours a year together, not counting committee meetings or any individual contributions there, but as a governing body, they were together in a room for 6 hours a year. And then the next question we asked was, how much of that 6 hours is at the strategic and generative level of conversation versus the operational, perfunctory report outs, questions about why copy paper costs more this month than it did last month, those kinds of things. 87 of the 100 organizations said that less than half of their 6 hours was at the generative strategic level. So now we're talking under 3 hours a year that the volunteer governing body of this mission, that's getting a tax break because they've made this social promise to the community, less than 3 hours a year on that. So you're really onto it when you say we got to change the way we meet. And staff leadership, that same way. We have this cadence that we do where we think we got to come in and say, well, this is what the program department's working on this week and what we did last week. And here's what the fundraising department did last week. And those are not what somebody said. Report outs are literally conversations about things you can no longer do anything about.
I mean, sometimes it's useful context, right? People need to know what's happening outside. But
information is important.
That's the pre-read. Like in the best case scenario, that's what you've read ahead, so that you can show up prepared. I think that's where
theoretically you've read ahead, right? The idea is that they read it.
But I think what I see from my clients is that when the conversation builds on them, when it actually requires, when in order to engage in when there's an expectation of dialogue. In order to engage in the dialogue means you have read at least briefly what's there, right? It's different. I feel like I see that from nonprofit boards I've sat on as well. If the board chair had that expectation, you've read, you're coming in, and here are the 3 questions we're going to wrestle with together. Come prepared to wrestle with them. It's a different conversation.
Yeah. And back to shared ownership, I'll say one more thing, and then I'm going to slightly shift gears for just a few minutes, and then we'll wrap here before long. We do an increasing amount of what we call systemic team coaching in our work. So senior leadership teams in particular, understanding their role in leading a system, and that they are a system, that they lead systems, that they're a part of systems, and the telescoping view. And one of the things that we tell C-suite leaders is that they have 2 jobs. One is whatever letter follows their C. Right? If I'm the CFO, one of my jobs is to lead and drive decision making and growth in our financial function. If I'm the CMO, my job is marketing. Right?
Yes.
But your second job as a member of the C-suite is membership in the C-suite. There is a leadership team that many organizations, and particularly nonprofits, don't use C-suites. They use senior leadership teams. Okay. What's the job of a member of a senior leadership team, regardless of the letters or the title behind their directorship? That's the shared ownership space. What is it we're doing as a team that we can only accomplish as a team and not a set of 5 senior directors? And that's helping them see what their shared ownership as a leadership team is, not just, back to your point, well, here's what we're working on in finance and here's what we're working on in marketing. And we all go back to our corners and go back to our work.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I work with a framework kind of around team one with similar work. But looking at, to me, I also talk with clients about just the distinction between a smart organization that you can technically do the skills, right? You've got the finance, you've got the marketing, you've got your product or your programs, you've got that piece down. And then it also needs to be healthy, right? High morale, low turnover, ability to solve problems, to adapt, to handle complexity, to notice a mistake and address it quickly, right? That is a different set of skills. And so for leaders, it's both, their area of technical expertise and and then the second thing is their ability to work together. And the third is a steward of the culture. How are you actually contributing to that in a broader way?
Well said. I love that framing. All right, I want to shift gears here. I read a chapter that you wrote in a book Trailblazer Secrets, and you wrote a chapter in that book, and I found your construct. First of all, let me just compliment the way you took a very short chapter and said a lot in a few words. So I really appreciated that. I'm thinking even right now, your chapter in your book was a little bit more personal, about personal calling, fulfilling your personal calling, answering it, responding to it, purpose, calling. And you mention some polarities that we face. I'm going to have you walk through them in a minute. Before you walk through those, how am I trying to set this up? I know what I'm trying to say. The polarities that you've set up, the whole construct of your chapter, if I got it right at all, was that it's not an either or. It's not, well, I can either do this or I can do that. The same applies to organizations. One of the polarities that I see a lot is, well, we can go fast or we can go far. Mm. And I've challenged that. I want to know, can we go far fast? I'm not resigned to the fact that we have to pick one of those. We were doing an exercise the other day with a team, and you've probably heard this in marketing. You can have it fast, you can have it cheap, or you can have it good.
Yeah.
But you got to pick no more than two of those because you can't have all three. And my mind goes, why not? What if you could? What if it could be fast, cheap, and quality all at the same time? I think there probably are things like that. So, just thinking about polarity and your questioning of the binary, the prison of two ideas, as they say, I would love for you to just take a few minutes and walk through these 6 C's, these 3 polarities, and just to describe them enough to pique people's interest, because I just thought they were beautifully framed.
Thank you. Well, maybe I'll take one to step back and say the chapter and really the work is around how I talk about purpose-led leaders and the sense of they're drawn to make a contribution. It's not because we inherited this, and it's not because we have to, that there's a choice about, I feel compelled to do this thing. And I find for whether it's a foundation leader, a social enterprise leader, a nonprofit leader, if it's really coming from that place of like a deep calling, I trust that the work is needed in the world, that what you're bringing is important. But if it really is edgy enough for you to be like, this is what I'm going to devote myself to, there's something there for you. There's some way in which this is here to evoke your own growth, your own evolution. I think for leaders that have been in that work for, years, it's, this particular job or this particular role, there's some reason you said yes. And I get curious. And I think often, leaders come to you or I, and in that moment where there's this like deep call and there's also some question. And so these polarities are really about how do you expand the impact that you have in the world, but also recognize how this role is here to help you grow. And so the first polarity is compassion and curiosity. So I feel like compassion is the sense of the shared humanity of it's hard, whether that's hard because you've got, I've had moments this year where I had work things that needed to happen and a team that needed support while my daughter's sick and my mom's, needing her own care, and sort of I'm pulled in many directions, and there's more than I can do in a day or in a week. For the leaders that we see, there's this sense of just slowing down and having some compassion for ourselves, some sense of like what I'm struggling with is not unique to me. And maybe pausing just long enough to actually feel we talked about, you mentioned earlier, kind of these systems, whether it's poverty or homelessness or domestic violence, that there is an emotional weight to the work right now that's worth holding and naming, and honoring. And I think some coaching just stops there, right? We're going to talk about self-care. We're going to just process how to hold that. We're going to work with the emotions around that, all important. And what I'm actually pairing that with is some curiosity. Like, what is the unique challenge for you? What is unique to you about your own history and your set of circumstances that makes this hard in a way that it might be inviting some growth? So I've seen that, whether that was an executive director who, in this inquiry, like, yes, she was struggling, and yes, there was a lot to feel through, but there was also some sense of she was actually being invited, whether that was from her teenage daughter or her board in that moment, to learn a whole new lesson about boundaries and being able to assert what she needed, and say no. And so there's something about this curiosity that says, okay, there's something unique in this for me. Can I pay attention to that? What's my growth edge here? And so you'll see, I think some coaching will lean on one or the other. We'll just say like, all right, there's a growth edge here. Let's drive through it. And others were going to say, oh, let's slow down and do self-care. And my sense is, to really grow in this moment, you need both. Your impact needs both. Your heart needs both. Your growth needs both.
Yeah. I'm an action-oriented coach. And so one of the things that I'm always wanting to do is help my leaders get to some kind of action. Like, we can talk theory and we can talk concept and we can have great conversations and, get into psychological stuff if you want to, but if it doesn't change anything, what was the point? And so what I do, my challenge is, I sometimes will move too quickly to the action space and not pause long enough for the curiosity, the inquiry, let's dive deeper. So what's driving this? And, the quintessential, how does that make you feel question that really is more about, why does this, I notice this pulls out this emotion in you. I can hear your voice change. I can see whenever you talk about this thing, tell me, where's that coming from? What's that going? So spending more time there. And so for me, that's been a challenge, a polarity. Well, is it action or is it reflection? Yes.
Right. I mean, because I think actually that you talked about, can I go fast and far? My sense is yes, if you know where you're going, if you're fully aligned
good.
For the action.
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
so
if
part of me
you've
is
got a
holding back
vehicle,
right? If some part of me is holding back because I'm conflicted or I haven't made space, or right. I feel like right now I had a client who, is another leader in a nonprofit, and in the particular field that she's in, there was just a lot of, her team was struggling. They were not necessarily feeling safe. There were some challenges. And she said, I feel like all I'm doing is holding space. And I said, yes.
Yeah.
And she kind of looked at me and she was like, oh, that's the work right now. Oh, right. My team, the leaders that I coach, they're capable of taking action. They don't need an accountability partner.
Yeah.
If they're aligned, if they had space to feel and to think for a moment, the action comes
That's
fast.
good. Yeah, that's good.
So
Yeah, go ahead.
should I continue? Yeah.
Yep.
The second polarity is I'm capable and I need to collaborate.
Yeah.
So this capable part is, what is my genius? What is my joy? What am I capable of? How do I actually drive and move into that place of action? And collaborate is, and whatever my genius, joy, contribution is, it's not enough. And I think there's some coaches that would say, like, we're just going to work on that feeling of not enough. We're going to fix that. We're going to remove that. We're going to hypnotherapy that away because you are enough. And I guess what I'm here to say is you're not, and that's perfect.
Yeah.
Your contribution, as big and powerful it is, can't fix the system by itself. So, right, how can you bring yours fully and invite and notice that when that feeling of not enough is there, rather than fight it, fix it, deny it, push it down, it's notice okay, who else is needed now?
That's good. And I'm seeing another, like a third dimension on top of that, which is not only are my capabilities not enough to do certain things, but others aren't as well. So my contribution to them is purposeful. My contribution as a part of a collaboration is not just I'm getting help. I'm also giving help. We're making things stronger by collaborating.
Absolutely. I think that's part of why I love in my group program, Collective Counsel, having people see each other's strengths and contributions. Sometimes it's so much easier to see in another leader that they are both extremely capable and absolutely needing support. And that there's a giving and receiving support is the same thing, that actually bringing other people in, inviting them in, like this foundation client that her program that went from $1 million moved to 4.5. Other organizations, by contributing to her vision, moved more money, got a more systemic access, right? Built new relationships and collaborations, that what she was providing, what she needed, was also an invitation for someone else to show up. So I appreciate you saying that.
That's good. And the third set of C's.
Yeah, is around courage and care. So I think, again, often, especially for those who are, really kind of drive, it's that sense of got to get it done, drive right over the limits. But it's to go boldly, and including delegate boldly. I feel like I've listened to some of your other episodes where you talk about, delegate significantly. I would say, to hear my word would be delegate boldly. See how you can invite people in and bring care, that it's not either or. Either I'm going to just tend to myself and I'm going to stay in my comfort zone, or I'm going to be courageous and I'm going to armor up and I'm going to drive through. But I think for leaders, part of the vulnerability, part of what brings people with you is to be courageous and share about it. I'm not exactly sure how this is going to go. And here's our experiment today. Here's how I'm going to show up today and bring that. Here's what I know. And here's transparently what I don't. And here's how we're going to discover if this is the right path together.
Yep. And especially in the social sector environment, leaders who put your head down, keep moving. I know it's hard, but weather the storm. You're carrying the weight of the world. You got to do it. Nobody else is doing it. Wear the cape, be the hero. And that's courageous. And it's also destructive eventually. And so, that care part, and it can't be one or the other. It's got to be both. I appreciate that. There's I think it's Mark Thompson. He wrote in a book. I was a part of a book a number of years ago too. Wrote a chapter in a book called Taking the Leap. And it was about launching a coaching business. And Mark Thompson wrote in the book that sometimes we have to make things happen and sometimes we have to let things happen. And the ability to know when's the right time to do which, to push through. You know, you hear this, hey, if it is to be, it's up to me. You got to get out there and make it happen. No one's going to do it for you. And yet there are some times when you just have to allow the road to reveal itself and walk it. And it's a real balancing act to be able to do that. Wow, Jeanine, this is great. We could go on for so long. I may have to have you back on sometime and let's do part 2.
I would love that. What a delight.
I have 2 questions that I like to ask all my guests to wrap a show. And the first one, I just love the stories that I hear, and I hear some really unique things on this, but who comes to mind for you as a leader in your life, someone you know, don't know, past, present, who you would say has had profound influence or impact on your view of leadership and how you lead, and why? Why that person?
Yeah, right now, what I would say is Danella Meadows. She's a systems thinker and leader, and somebody that I've just studied with, studied her work. She's already passed, but studied her work. But I think it's the shift from managing the smaller outcomes and into the value of the paradigm is a piece of it. I think it's also learning more about her efforts to make change. And maybe I'll share some pieces around just having the information of what's needed isn't enough. So how do you move people? How do you motivate? How do you draw out their motivation and draw them into the work? Knowing that knowing what's right or knowing what's needed isn't enough. And so that's moving to me in this moment.
I love that you just said, how do I draw out their motivation? We usually talk about leaders and one of their jobs being that they let leaders motivate others, and they don't. Motivation isn't something a leader puts in you. It's something a leader draws out of you. It's already there. It's a matter of finding it, helping you find it. That was the magic for me in that response.
I feel like I just did this with a client. We had a client where there was teams that are struggling, but I'll start the leadership team meeting with a team that hadn't worked together, had a lot of friction, like, why this work for you? Why?
Yeah.
And really have people tell the stories because they need to be connected, not to your why, but to their own.
Yep. We talk about Dwight Eisenhower's definition of leadership all the time. He said leadership was the art of getting people to do things you want done because they want to do it. So a little bit humorous, but boy, he understood that, didn't he? Understood that principle of motivation, if nothing else.
Yeah.
Last question. You're on the top of a mountain with a megaphone, and all the leaders of the world are at the base of the mountain to hear what you have to say about leadership. And you've got 15 seconds thereabout to give the Jeanine Becker soundbite on the most important things, the most important thing all leaders should keep in mind as they lead. What are you saying?
You are needed and not enough, and that's perfect.
That's good. There's that polarity. You're needed and not enough, and that's perfect. Wow, that took 4 seconds. That didn't even yet. You left yourself 11 seconds. Jeanine, this was rich. Thank you. Thank you for the work you're doing. I want to point people again to the website. If you are interested in reaching out to Jeanine, seeing how she can help you, your organization, your foundation, your community, do this kind of systems work. It's onpurposetogether.com.
And please schedule a call on purposetogether.com/call. I'd love, if this resonated with you, I would love to connect.
Perfect. That's it. Love it. Jeanine, thanks again. Thank you, everyone, for listening. We went a little bit longer on this episode because I didn't want to stop. So thanks for being generous with the time and the content, Jeanine. Folks, we'll see you here next time for episode 157. Lead on.